when I was a kid growing up, my bedroom wall had these little, it's weird, like there were these two little slots right next to each other, and then there was like this third, kind of like a hole underneath. And I had like two of them over here, and then some more over there, and I could never figure out what these darn things were for. Until one day, my dad set his keys down, and I figured it out. I bet those go in there. And so, one night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I snuck out. My dad had left his keys out. I grabbed them, and I went back to my room. And the next morning, when I woke up, well, so my dad tells me he walked in, and I was sobbing uncontrollably. Like, can't get a word out, sobbing, just, you know what I'm talking about? Frenzied, can't. And he's trying to figure out what happened to me, and sees his keys beneath the electrical outlet in my bedroom, and puts together what had happened. And apparently those don't go there. And here's my question. Have you ever been curious about something that led to trying something that turned out real, real bad?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, hey, I think those go in there. And then you find out that though they may fit, they do not belong there. You know what I'm talking about? And all that said, I just want to ask you a question. I'd love your feedback. I really would love to know what you think. You can shout it out. You don't have to raise your hand. But this last week, what have you found yourself wondering about? What do you wonder about?
Why people in Fresno drive so terribly?
Okay, so what's really funny is, first service, somebody said the exact same thing. So that's ironic. Hank, I can't get this to click. What else do you wonder about?
Why those things don't work.
Why, I agree, right? They work until they don't work. What do you wonder about? Why Fresno has bad drivers?
Why is everybody offended by everything?
Why is everyone offended by everything? Does anybody else wonder that?
That's a good one.
What do you find yourself wondering about?
How am I going to die?
How am I going to die? Something about Christmas lights? And when Christmas lights gets wet, how come they don't? Yeah.
How come people don't smile more?
How come people don't smile more? Somebody before this first service, or before the second service said, Josh, you're fabulous. Show more people. And I was like, right on, I like that. Okay. So I asked, via proxy, I found out what a 9-year-old wondered about this last week. And so I asked Jeff Stemple, and Jeff asked his youngest daughter. And this is what Sydney Stemple wonders about. When birds are chirping, are they communicating or just making noise? And I don't know. I really don't. 2, who invented 4th grade math? Because in her words, I don't like 4th grade math. Neither did I. And last, what were her friends getting their siblings for Christmas? Here's what's interesting to me. I think culture tells us as adults it's not okay to wonder. We're not allowed to wonder. Matter of fact, if there's something you don't know, you should know it. And if you don't know it, you figure it out quick, or stay really busy so you don't have to think about what you don't know, because you should know. To the point that even like and it's always really silly stuff, right? But like you're watching Friends and Chandler Bing, and it's like, what's that movie that he's in? And for like 8 seconds you think about it, and then what do? You Google it, because we can't stand to not know. We don't wonder. They're actually scientists are now finding this, that the more things that we do in our brain, there's all these neural things that have to happen. We can't multitask even though we think we can. But that what happens is, when we sit and do nothing, that our brain is at its best to be creative. But when we're constantly doing things, we actually wear ourselves out such that we can't then be creative. So is it any wonder that wonder is diminishing? We're constantly going, we're constantly doing, we're never just thinking. And so first I want to do this. I want to define wonder. It actually has two definitions. The first is a desire to be curious. Like, do these keys fit in that socket? That's the first part of wonder. But then the second half of wonder, it's a feeling of surprise mingled with admiration caused by something beautiful, unexpected, unfamiliar, or inexplicable. Here's what I want to point out. Sometimes I think it's wonder that leads us to wonder. Sometimes it's curiosity that leads to experiencing something great. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's that, and here's, in the midst of the Christmas season, it's filled with wonder, but sometimes it just makes you wonder. Sometimes it makes you curious. Other times it has you thinking the deeper things. And this morning I want to show you a group of guys who, in the midst of everything that was happening, seemed to believe one thing: that they were smack dab in the middle of God's will. And I want to ask you that question, and I want you to think about that as we talk through this morning. What if what you're doing right now What if exactly where you're at is exactly where you're supposed to be? Now, some of you may hear that and go, well, I'm not in God's will. Okay, that's your judgment. But if you say that you're following Jesus, what if right now you're smack dab in the middle of God's will? I want to take a look at a story in the Bible that not only is it like there's so much known and yet like so much confused. I want to take a look at the Magi in Matthew chapter 2. So if you have your Bible, I want to invite you, Matthew chapter 2. I also have to give you a disclaimer because initially, so one of the things I'm going to point out in a few minutes is that there's nowhere that it say that there were 3 wise men, but rather instead there were 3 gifts. So people assume 3 gifts, 3 wise men. And so initially I was like, and so we don't know, and how dare, and then the rest of the service I said 3 wise men, 3 wise men, 3 wise men, 3 wise men. So if I say 3 wise men, I'm sorry. It's just been programmed in my brain. Matthew chapter 2 starts off by saying this. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's this one been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." There's a whole bunch of things in 2 verses. What's the first word? After. Were they at Jesus' birth? No. Why do they come in every nativity set? That bothers me. Why? They were not there. After Jesus born in Bethlehem during the time of King Herod. Herod was this king that had been raised Jewish, and he had become king of the Jews. He was maniacal. He was it was very bloody during his time, and he dealt very severely with anyone who threatened his throne. But he was not born to be king. He was not of the king. He took it. Does that make sense? So King Herod. Magi, it just means a wise person. Doesn't necessarily mean a king, even though the songs are about kings. And what's interesting too is Magi in the Bible were just often used to describe anybody who studied the stars, anyone who was considered a wise person. And at some points it's actually even used to describe a sorcerer. So the fact that Matthew says nothing, like he doesn't talk down about these Magi is pretty interesting. So Magi come from where? That'll become important in a little bit. Don't forget where they came from. Came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who's been," what's the next word? Well, was Herod born king of the Jews? He kind of took it. So if you're the king and someone came to you and said, "Hey, where's the one who's just been born the next king?" Would that bother you? That would seem like a threat to me, personally. Maybe I'm just easily threatened. I don't know. And then it ends and says this, "We saw his star when it" what? Rose, "and have come to worship him." Okay, so I have lots of questions, but I want to start here. The star. So the Magi probably, because of their title, probably studied the skies. They probably studied the stars. This was their thing. Here's my question. How do you know when it's time to go? Like they studied the skies for forever. What was it they saw that made them know this is the one? Was it just really bright? Was it new? Did it blink? Did it move? Did it spell their name? I don't know. I'm just asking. How did they know this was the one? Because it seems pretty definitive in their mind. Wouldn't you agree? We saw the star, and what'd they do? They packed up and they went on this huge journey. They'd been looking for this star, and something happened, and they knew, it's time, let's go. And that's really remarkable to me, because I'm really convinced they believed they were 100% smack dab in the middle of God's will, even though there were probably points on the journey where they thought, maybe that wasn't the star. Maybe it wasn't, maybe we didn't see it. Maybe, what happens if one night it just wasn't there? Wouldn't that be discouraging? You're on your journey and then it's just gone? So here's what's interesting. There's this guy from Notre Dame. His last name's Matthews, so I'm just going to call him the scientist because like he's Matthews and this is Matthew and it gets confusing. This scientist, a couple things. One, where were the Magi from? East. This scientist found writings from Korean and Chinese astronomers recording an event in 4 BC which described something like a comet with no tail and didn't move. Isn't that interesting? And then for this reason, he believed that on April 17th in 6 BC, that there was a point where the planets aligned in such a way that the Sun, Jupiter, the Moon, Saturn, all were in the constellation of Aries, while Venus and Mars were right next to it in neighboring constellations. So all of these planets showed up for the first time in a certain way that they could see them. Whoa. And so maybe that was the thing that let them know, hey, it's time to go. But what's interesting is if that's the case, and let me be very, very clear, this is all just like some guy from Notre Dame figured this out, so who knows? That doesn't mean it's in the Bible, right? But if that's true, the way that being able to see planets like that would work, the alignment of them, you wouldn't be able to see the planets until probably 15 to 20 minutes before sunup. And then the sun would rise, and though you would still be able to see them technically, the sun would wash everything out. You couldn't see it. So what if these guys didn't follow a star every single night as it went, but what if every morning they got a glimpse for a few minutes of what was there and continued their trek? And would that explain why they saw it and no one else did? I don't know. But I'll tell you this. Isn't it even more remarkable if they only saw it 10 minutes a day and they continued on their journey anyway? Isn't it pretty incredible? They had to be filled with wonder. Is that really the star? Could this really be it? Generations, we've looked for something. Was that the one? And yet they believed what I often don't, that they were right in the middle of where God wanted them to be. Here's where it gets even cooler. If it was planetary alignment, how long before this did God set that in motion? Like, how many years had this been planned? Because it doesn't happen every day, I don't think. I don't actually really know a lot about stars. But I don't think that happens often. So how long had God been planning this whole thing? For one night. For one group of guys to see it and for them to go, let's go. What's really interesting is if this is the case, which again, I'm not saying it is, but if it is, what's really surprising is that this planetary alignment started April 17th of 6 BC and lasted till December 19th of 6 BC, approximately 8 months. So maybe that's about how long their journey was. We don't know. We have no idea. So, all that said, that's the star. We have no idea, but it's interesting. But what if what you're doing right now as you try to follow Jesus has you smack dab in the middle of where God wants you to be? Even though on the journey it may feel discouraging. Even though on the journey you may question, did God really want me to? Did God really say to stay? Did God really say to... Verse 3 says this, when King Herod heard their question, where's the one born king of the Jews? He was what? Disturbed. I love that word. That is not like a common word. He was mad. Well, okay, who cares? He was disturbed. What's bad about a bloodthirsty tyrant type king being disturbed? That's what I thought. Not much. And then it says this though, and not just him, but all of Jerusalem with him. Why was Jerusalem disturbed? Well, if a bloodthirsty tyrant king gets disturbed, then maybe that's cause for... Or what if the wise men, because they didn't travel alone, right? They had to bring people to like set up camp, tear down camp, take care of the animals, feed the people that were there. Probably have to go get food and bring it back and feed everybody. So how many people actually were on this journey? What if there were so many people on this journey that when they arrived in Jerusalem, Jerusalem thought, oh, they've come to take over? I don't know, but what if? What if that was how much work it took for these guys to make this? What if it wasn't just 3 guys on this journey, but what if it was like thousands of people that all went on this journey because they were so convinced because they saw a star every morning for like 20 minutes? How much do you think they then believed they were where God wanted them to be? So then he's disturbed, Jerusalem's disturbed with him. When Herod had called together all the chiefs, priests, and teachers of the law, he asked them, notice this, I missed this first service. Where's who to be born? What did the wise men ask? King of the Jews. Does Herod know something greater is going on? He's talking about the one that it's been prophesied. Carl talked about this last week. 800 plus years. This prophecy of a Messiah that would come. Herod's in on it. I don't even know if the wise men actually are aware of all that's going on. Maybe they are, but I don't know. But Herod is. Where's the one that's the Messiah to be born? And they said in Bethlehem in Judea. And so then they quote the prophecy in verse 6, which says, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. This is actually from another verse in a book called Micah, which says, but you, Bethlehem, though you're small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come one who will be the ruler over all Israel. This was given hundreds of years before Herod's men figured this. I mean, this is where they got it from. They went back and looked hundreds of years back to see what Micah had said. So Herod's in on it. Something greater's going on. Wise men maybe are, maybe aren't, but they have made this journey because they are convinced this is what God wants them to do, and they believed it day after day. They show up, they ask the king, he's disturbed by it, and that's where we pick up the story. Then Herod calls the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. More on that in a minute. Then he sends them to Bethlehem, but says, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you know where he is, report him to me so that I too may go and worship him. If you're the king and you find out that not just the next king who's not your child has been born, but also that he's the one that for hundreds of years has been prophesied that is going to come and free the Israelites, are you interested in worshiping him? No. Not even a little? No. What do you want to do to this guy? Kill him. You want to end him. Somebody even pointed out, like, why doesn't Herod just send a guy with the Magi? And take care of it right then and there. But Herod's also a little crazy. So, I mean, he may just not have thought of that. Or maybe he was afraid of what would... either way. And then the first part, he tries to find out when the star showed up. Eventually, you'll find out, I'm going to give the end away, but like the Magi don't go back to Herod. And when that happens, Herod then executes or orders that all babies under 2 be killed. Where did he come up with the number 2? From when the star probably first appeared. So that's why that's important anyway. It's cool. I thought it was cool. If you don't think it's cool, sorry. Verse 9 says this, after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Here's the deal. I think this is the point in the story. So maybe it's all miraculous. It very well could be, but in my mind, for sure, this departs from, like, I don't know lots about stars, but this is really... How would you, like, draw a straight line down from a star in the sky to, like, one house? I don't know. I couldn't do it. Maybe they were experts in the stars, so maybe they could. But bottom line, I think this is where it shifts, where it clearly shifts to miracle. God is leading them by this star a couple hours from Jerusalem to Bethlehem in front of this house where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. I love their reaction that they are not just joyful. They're overly joyful, right? Which is interesting that a group of people... Like there's this Messiah promised to the Jews that would free the Jewish nation, and the people that are overjoyed to see him are these foreigners. And it's like foreshadowing. It's ushering in this new age that Jesus has come not just for the Jew, but for everyone, the foreigner as well. And they're overjoyed. And then, so here's what's interesting to me. I grew up in a family, I don't know what you guys do for Christmas. My family, so after Thanksgiving, we pull out our Christmas decorations and we start playing Christmas music, but not before because that's in the Bible. And then it's not. And we set everything up. And then every night, every Sunday night for us is when we did it. We would do the Advent wreath, kind of like we did this morning, where we would try and remind ourselves of what we were celebrating and the story, which was a lot. It was a great part of being a kid because we got to light stuff on fire. And then, you know, come Christmas morning, we would wake up, we would read a passage in Luke 2 that talks about Jesus' birth, and we would open presents. That's kind of gift giving. We celebrate gift giving because of what? Because who gave gifts? The Magi. But were there when Jesus was born? No. So I have an aunt in Oregon who, she has a 2-story house, and they celebrate Christmas in the top left room of their house. And so after Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday if you will, they take Joseph and Mary and they put them in the bottom right room of their house. And over the next few days, guess what happens? Yeah, this is like Elf on the Shelf before the elf sat on a shelf, right? It's like Bible Elf on shelf. And they'd move him, and then they'd take him up the stairs, and he'd go to the far right of the upstairs. And by December 23rd, 24th, Joseph and Mary and a donkey would arrive at the nativity scene, along with probably, you know, the angels and the animals. Who wasn't there? Who else wasn't there on December 23rd or 24th? Jesus, right? And so then the kids would go to bed December 24th, and they'd wake up December 25th, and who's there? On the same day, they would take the wise men and place them in the bottom right room of the house. And every day, they would move the wise men until January 6th, which is called Epiphany Day. It's actually celebrated in Europe. It's a day where you exchange gifts, and it celebrates the wise men having arrived at Jesus' house. And they would celebrate, do most of their stuff on Christmas. They would leave all their Christmas decorations up until January 6th, which felt lazy to me, but they said it was on purpose. And then eventually they would do their final gifts on January 6th when the wise men arrived at the nativity scene. Isn't that cool? They only ever did it once, they said. They had good intentions. That was it. They also said it wasn't uncommon for the wise men to jump multiple rooms or even stories very quickly. It's January 5th. They're way behind. Scoot them forward. But I love this because it's an emphasis on what really happened, and I thought it was a great way for kids to learn in a way that my parents really deprived me. So I love that, and that's really important, and I love that it really shows these guys' journey and what it took and what it cost them, and even though the event had already happened, they set out anyway because they really believed they were right where God wanted them. And so then the story kind of wraps up this way. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they what? Bowed. We don't know if these guys were kings necessarily, but they were certainly wise men, and the gifts they brought were expensive, so they were probably of some notoriety, right? Bow in that day probably, I mean, when I think bow, I think on your knees, and then you kind of do the like, you know what I'm talking about? But bow back then often meant like prostrate, like face down, laid out fully on the ground. And so you have these men of seemingly great means, probably with a whole bunch of people signifying someone important is coming. And they get off of their animals and they lay in a tiny town by probably a very simple and basic house. And they see a baby and they lay face first. And I love the picture of the world's values just being turned on its head. Here you have the great before the weak. Of course, there's also the Messiah, the one who's going to free the world, and is God. But in the moment, it was a baby, right? And I love that. And then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Gold has always had great value. Frankincense was a spice that was of great value. Myrrh was often used for burials, but it was also a spice that could be used for other things. These are very expensive gifts. They are not common to people that lived in Bethlehem. And yet they're given. These are gifts that would be fit for a king. And then the verse wraps, the 12th verse says, and having been warned in a dream, not to go back to Herod, these guys studied the stars, so being told in a dream something was probably right on, they totally trusted this, and it was told to them in a way that made sense. They returned to their country by another route. And that's it. Thousands of years later, we still talk about these guys and their journey that's incredible, and we don't even really know a whole bunch about their journey. Matter of fact, the way I was raised, it took like 12 days, because there's 12 days of Christmas, right? It's just a simple thing. It wasn't that big of a deal, and yet these guys moved heaven and earth, probably cashed in a ton of their assets, took months, if not years off of their lives to be able to make this journey because they believed this is what God wanted them to do. They'd studied the stars for years in preparation to know when God wants us to do something, we're just waiting. And then they saw it, and it's like, game on, let's go. So this morning, what I would like to do is two things. One, I would like to give us or remind us of the wonder that God is. And two, I want to challenge us with something. There's NASA launched this thing they call Voyager 1 long time ago. In 1990, it sent us a picture from 6 billion miles away. That's the Earth. Do you see the like orange ray on the right? A little bit above halfway, see that little... So like if you wave right now though, then maybe... Not really, that's a joke. So that's us. 6 billion miles away, that's us. And he took this picture. There was a philosopher who saw this picture and was reading the book of Ecclesiastes, and he said this, and I would just invite you for a second, stare at Earth. There it is right there. Just stare at Earth for a second and listen to what he wrote. Look at the dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of. Every human being who ever was lived out their lives. The aggregate of joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and in triumph they could become momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of the other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings and how fervent their hatreds. The earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There's nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. And there's perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. And I saw this and I experienced these words last week, and I took it in and thought, what problem I had last week? What thing that I was worried about? This is wonder. And what this guy misses, but I want us to understand, and what the wise men got, is that though that is us, and that God has made incredible expanses, and his creation is intricate. He lined stuff up hundreds of years in advance for these guys. Though all of that is true, the thing that this philosopher misses, but I want you to get, is this: and God couldn't care more about you. He cares more about you than anything else he made. So though we are the dot, he cares more about that dot than anything else. One of the things about wonder is this, and maybe you can relate, but sometimes I see things like this, and I begin to worry, because I'm not in control, because I don't know it all. Matter of fact, I don't even know enough. And so I get paralyzed, and I just keep doing what I'm doing. What I love about the wise men is they were curious. They had wonder. They studied the stars. And it led to this wonder of something greater than they could even begin to understand they were a part of. And in the midst of it, without knowing everything, of all the people on the earth at that time, they studied the stars. They probably understood better than anyone else. They had no control. They still journeyed. They were convinced this is what God wanted them to do. And so this morning, again, I ask you the question: what would you do this week if you were 100% sure you were in the middle of God's will? How would you act? What if this moment right now, what you are doing, if you are seeking to follow Jesus, what if what you're doing, where you're working, who you're with, who you're around, the friends that you're with, what if that is right where God wants you? Now, if you think I don't care anything about God, but then maybe this is a question to ask. What does it look like for you to be smack dab in the middle of God's will? But if you were a Christ follower, I would say, what would you do this week? If it's okay with you, I want to share what I want to try and do. This probably doesn't relate to you, but it might. A couple sermons ago, I taught about how something God was teaching me, and you guys all agreed that I should learn that. This is about you. What does God want you to do? Here's what I think God wants me to do. This week, I asked a friend that I trust deeply a question that's a scary question. What's one thing that you know about me that I don't know about me that I should know? What's one thing you know about me that I'm not asking you this question, by the way. I just want that to be very clear. What's one thing you know about me that I don't know about me that I should? And the response was on the money. It was one of those moments, have you ever had someone talking to you and you're like, I got to listen to that? And it was this. Sometimes you get really restless. Sometimes you think you should be doing more, there should be more activity, there should be more this, more that, and you end up getting really restless. And so for me, the restless person, and maybe you can relate to being restless, what does it look like for the restless person to believe they're smack dab in the middle of God's will? Here's what it looks like for me. For me, it looks like this. When I begin to feel restless, I've got to start speaking some truth over myself that because I'm here, I think this is where God wants me. This doesn't mean he wants me here forever. But in this moment, in the circumstances I find myself in, I'm not stuck here, I'm stationed here by God. And that changes perspective a little bit, doesn't it? If you're following Jesus, what would you do this week? If you're already following Jesus, what would you do this week if you were 100% sure you were smack dab in the middle of God's will? How would you act? What would you make sure you got done this week? I don't know. But I will tell you this. Don't let worry keep you from doing it. The wise men did this excellently. They really believed. I'm sure, the thing we don't know about their journey, surely there were obstacles, right? You don't listen, I can't plan a winter camp for high school kids for 48 hours without something going wrong. Surely these guys with hundreds or thousands of people making this huge journey across deserts had camels break down or food go bad or I don't know, but certainly there were problems, right? And it doesn't seem that it deterred these guys. They were on a mission. They were convinced this is exactly what God wanted them to do, and they kept doing it. Even though I'm sure there were moments of, well, what if? And I don't know. You know what I'm talking about? So what would you do this week if you were 100% sure you were in the middle of God's will? Let's pray.